At the very end of 2025, China held massive military drills surrounding Taiwan. Operating in all directions from the island, China deployed at least 14 warships, another 14 Coast Guard vessels, an amphibious assault strike group, and 130 fighter jets, drones, and other military aircraft. As if that wasn't enough, the PLA fired at least 27 rockets into the waters near Taiwan. China's military explicitly said the two-day drills were preparation for a blockade of Taiwan and claimed to have successfully blockaded the ports of Kaohsiung and Keelung. The PLA also released drone footage showing the skyscraper Taipei 101. The footage, China claimed, had been taken by its military during the drill, although Taiwan's government called that fake news. Despite taking place in the holiday lull just before New Year's Day, China's military drills were widely covered in the international media. But in Taiwan, the reaction was a collective yawn. Headlines in major news outlets from various ends of Taiwan's political spectrum focused on more important matters: the death of Taiwanese singer and variety show personality Cao Shiping, and the year-end stock market reports for TSMC. It turns out that people in Taiwan aren't all that bothered by China's military drills around the island. There have simply been too many of them. Justice Mission 2025, the name China gave to the December drills, was the 7th major military exercise held around Taiwan since August 2022, when then U.S. Speaker of the House Nancy Pelosi visited Taipei. Visits by U.S. dignitaries always cause consternation in China, and Pelosi was the highest-ranking U.S. politician to make the trip in 25 years. Since then, massive Chinese military drills around Taiwan have become a new normal. The world looks at the PLA maneuvers and thinks of World War III. Taiwanese, for the most part, think, same old, same old. Today, we're looking at how Taiwan's people actually feel about Chinese military moves near their homeland, and what that tells us about Taiwanese preparation for the unthinkable, an actual Chinese invasion. Justice Mission 2025 was part of a new normal. China has been holding regular, large-scale military drills surrounding Taiwan since 2022, when China framed the first such exercise as retaliation for Pelosi's visit. The 2022 PLA drills lasted for a full week and came as close as 20 kilometers to Taiwan's shores. China deployed a full carrier strike group, as well as a nuclear submarine, both of which took part in live-fire drills. PLA drones flew over Taiwan's outlying islands, while military aircraft got closer than ever to Taiwan itself, including a sortie of 21 fighters at once. China also test-launched missiles from its east coast. Several missiles flew over Taiwan to land in the ocean to the island's east. And yet, even this massive, unprecedented show of force by China's military didn't fully capture attention in Taiwan. Although the 2022 live-fire drills were front-page news, many Taiwanese seemed more interested in a plagiarism scandal affecting a candidate in the Taoyuan mayor's race that year. Brian Hyo, a Taipei-based journalist, talks about the ho-hum reactions among Taiwanese.
Since the Pelosi visit to Taiwan, every single time there has been Chinese military drills, the world will act as though World War III is on the horizon, and then in Taiwan, life goes on as normal. Most people, I don't think, really cared all that much. And so that has often been the pattern, and no matter how much international reporting there is on it, there's just not a lot of people freaking out in Taiwan in the streets.
While Taiwan's government warned that the Chinese military drills could be a pretext for an actual blockade, there was relative calm throughout Taiwan. There was no panic buying or clamoring for air raid shelters. Liuqiu Island, where some of the drills took place, reported declining tourist numbers. But there were also some reports in the Taiwanese news of tourists who went to Liuqiu specifically to see if they could catch a glimpse of the exercises. Since 2022, China has held a succession of large-scale military drills around Taiwan, each time mobilizing its Navy, Air Force, Rocket Force, and Coast Guard. There were 2 large drills in 2023, 2 in 2024, Joint Sword A and B, and 2 more in 2025, Straight Thunder and Justice Mission. Aside from these full-scale drills, Taiwan's Ministry of National Defense continued to report daily incursions into Taiwanese airspace and waters by PLA vessels and aircraft. Yet, despite it all, Taiwanese are largely inured to the threat. Viewed from the outside, China's ever-growing military drills do look scary. So why don't Taiwanese care? Brian has some theories.
People are just very used to it. There has been literal decades of Chinese military threats directed at Taiwan with thousands of missiles and occasional military exercises. And we do see this very noticeable uptick in Chinese military activity, as well as this routinization of it. Because it's gone on for so long, I think people are just rather numb to it. People usually don't pay attention to if it's 10 planes a day or 100 planes tomorrow. And so there's a lack of a progressing, escalating sense of development in terms of military drills perhaps despite China's best efforts to convey that sense to Taiwan, that really hasn't struck a chord with the public.
That isn't to say that Taiwanese don't care about the threat to their homeland at all. They do. They just aren't all that interested in the PLA's specific military maneuvers. Oddly enough, events abroad have actually sparked more interest from Taiwanese who are worried about a Chinese takeover. Russia's 2022 invasion of Ukraine, for instance, was closely followed in Taiwan. There was a surge of pro-Ukraine rallies and protests from Taiwanese who saw the Ukrainian struggle as a mirror, a glimpse of the island's possible future. Before that, China's crackdown on Hong Kong's 2019 pro-democracy protests and the de facto death of one country, two systems also sparked a backlash and a wave of pro-Hong Kong sympathy in Taiwan. Beijing has always held Hong Kong up as a model for Taiwan, offering it the same arrangement under which Taiwan would join the PRC but keep its unique economic, legal, and social systems. When China took over control of Hong Kong in 1997, Beijing pledged that the city would maintain all the freedoms that had existed under British rule. In 2020, China went back on that pledge, passing a national security law that gave the CCP full power to exert control in Hong Kong. One country, two systems died as China's system overwrote Hong Kong's. Today, there are no more protests, no more political opposition, no more free press or rule of law. This resonated deeply for Taiwanese. Many felt they were watching a preview of their own future, should Taiwan ever be brought under CCP rule. Whether it's Russia sending troops and tanks into Ukraine, or China taking full control of Hong Kong, these are tangible, immediate moves that have a visible impact on real people. The problem for Taiwan is that the threat from China is growing, but in ways that don't really attract public interest. And Taiwanese might not take notice until it's too late. Take the airplane example that Brian mentioned. Defense experts are extremely alarmed that China has effectively erased the median line, the midway point in the Taiwan Strait, which long functioned as a de facto demarcation line between China-administered airspace and that administered by Taiwan. PLA aircraft now routinely fly on Taiwan's side of the line, sometimes even coming into Taiwan's actual territorial airspace. Part of this new normal involves what experts call gray zone tactics. These are actions that stop short of full-scale war, but are designed to fulfill China's strategic goals. And one of those goals is simply to exhaust Taiwan's resources. Every time a PLA fighter jet crosses the median line, Taiwan's Air Force scrambles its own jets in response. Each scramble costs thousands of dollars in fuel and places mechanical stress on Taiwan's aging fighter fleet. This is now happening almost every single day. For the average citizen in Taipei, these near-daily scrambles are invisible, but for Taiwan's military, they are a slow-motion crisis. By keeping the pressure just below the boiling point, China hopes to wear down the morale of Taiwan's service members and the military's budget without ever having to fire a shot. Few people, whether in Taiwan or elsewhere, care much about this sort of minutia. Even fewer are likely to notice changes in the makeup of PLA sorties. While the number of Chinese military aircraft flying around Taiwan has actually dropped, the type of aircraft being deployed is more threatening than ever before. 5 J-10 fighters are less dangerous than a coordinated formation consisting of 2 J-16 fighters supported by a KJ-500 airborne early warning aircraft. But just hearing that sentence makes most people's eyes glaze over. The same goes for naval maneuvers. Again, China is effectively ignoring the median line, while sending more and more capable naval vessels into the waters around Taiwan. But perhaps even more concerning are the occasional mass gatherings of nominally civilian vessels around Taiwan, fishing boats and shipping boats. These vessels form part of China's massive maritime militia, which allows Beijing to press any civilian boat into military service. Drills involving thousands of civilian boats show a level of civil-military integration that is extremely concerning to military analysts. But it's not something that's discussed at all in the Taiwanese public. At the end of the day, most Taiwanese simply don't believe that China is going to invade. The PRC has been threatening to take Taiwan by force for nearly 80 years. Mao Zedong tried repeatedly to mount an invasion of Taiwan, or at least its outlying islands, in the 1950s, but failed each time. In 1995 and 1996, as Taiwan prepared for its first democratic presidential election, China fired missiles into the Taiwan Strait, a warning against the pro-independence policies of then-President Lee Teng-hui. Taiwanese voted for him anyway, in a landslide. The sort of large-scale military drills that began in 2022 are part of this historical context. Such threats have long since stopped having much impact on Taiwanese society. In one sense, that's an example of Taiwanese resilience. China's military drills and the related propaganda, like that supposed drone footage of Taipei 101, aren't having the desired psychological impact. The Taiwanese simply are not panicking in the face of Beijing's threats. Taiwan's military stressed this theme in a video it made after China's latest military drills, declaring, "Life goes on." But a sense of complacency can also be dangerous. We saw that in the case of Ukraine before Russia's full-scale invasion on February 24, 2022. Despite considerable evidence that Russia was amassing troops on the border with Ukraine and increasingly dire warnings from U.S. intelligence, Ukraine's people and its government continued to brush off concerns until the very last minute. The U.S. government warned in mid-February 2022 that an invasion, a major military action, could begin by Russia in Ukraine any day now. But many in Ukraine just did not believe it. Russia denied that its military drills, its excuse for the troop buildup, were preparation for an invasion. That was a lie. While Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky publicly thanked the U.S. for its warnings, he also said on February 13th that the warnings were playing into Russian hands. "The best friend of our enemies is panic in our country," Zelensky said. 11 days later, Russian troops were on Ukrainian soil and headed for Kyiv. In Taiwan, if we do see troops amassing on China's eastern coast, it may also be hard to convince Taiwanese people that the threat is real this time. After all, China's drills have simulated military action many times before.
It takes months to weeks at least move troops into place for an invasion. You can predict that ahead of time by troops amassing on the coast of China. That level of knowledge is not something that the Taiwanese public really has. And so people don't pay attention. Invasion becomes this very abstract notion that even if there is a target date, then people may not believe it. It's rather hard to convince the public on that there could in fact be military action. I think it is actually very similar to Ukraine in that sense. And that is actually the challenge in terms of preparedness.
Taiwan's government is making a concerted push to try to prepare the general population for a worst-case scenario. In 2025, for the first time ever, Taiwan's annual Hongguan drills included civilian components, such as emergency response simulations and cyber attack countermeasures. The Lai Ching-te government has dubbed this whole of society resilience. It's a recognition of the fact that staving off a Chinese invasion or just surviving a blockade will take work and sacrifice from all Taiwanese, not just the military. Meanwhile, NGOs are also gearing up to try and prepare Taiwanese society for a military conflict. The most well-known are the Forward Alliance and the Kuma Academy. The Forward Alliance is run by a former Special Forces soldier and DPP politician. The Kuma Academy's motto is, "If you want peace, prepare for war." Since 2020, these and other groups have provided civil defense training to Taiwanese. But that doesn't mean training Taiwanese to take up arms. Taiwan's strict gun laws make training an unofficial civilian militia pretty much impossible. Instead, these programs focus on things like evacuation preparedness, first aid training, and even wilderness survival. Taiwanese interest in civil defense programs increased dramatically after Russia's invasion of Ukraine. And again, there's a disconnect between what international media reports on and what Taiwanese are actually doing. Some of the most widespread and most impactful trainings are flying completely under the radar. These are grassroots, neighborhood-level initiatives undertaken by small groups of locals.
I do see more people doing it. And there are more civil defense groups. The real activity is occurring at the grassroots level, at the neighborhood level. I sometimes am surprised when I go to a family dinner and then my cousins have done civil defense training, for example. Some have gotten certifications for like ambulances or driving trucks or these other possible skills for an emergency. But it's very hard to assess at the overall level to what degree that actually is influential. That's hard to know.
Despite these efforts, civil-military integration remains weak, partly because of the dark history of Taiwan's military. The army was a tool of oppression during the long years of authoritarian rule and martial law from 1947 to 1987. But there's another problem too. Curiously, public interest in geopolitical threats is comparatively low. Many young Taiwanese are simply disengaged from debates on national security. There's much more interest in how hard it is to find a good job or buy a house, the bread and butter issues that most concern every person on Earth. With housing prices in Taipei reaching record highs and wages remaining relatively flat, the China threat feels abstract compared to the threat from a more mundane source. inflation. But in the background, China is ratcheting up the military pressure, with each new drill sending more planes and more ships on more complex maneuvers around Taiwan. And there's increasingly talk, including from the U.S. military, of 2027 as the year when China might actually invade. 2027 is an important deadline. It's the 100th anniversary of the PLA, and Xi Jinping has set it as the date by which China's military must be fully modernized and ready to fight. To many Western analysts, that means Xi expects the PLA to be capable of invading Taiwan by 2027. This has been dubbed the Davidson Window, a reference to U.S. Admiral Philip Davidson, one of the first to give 2027 as a concrete date by which China wants to be able to invade Taiwan. Of course, that doesn't mean Xi plans to actually take military action next year, but many analysts have confused the preparation date for an invasion schedule. In Taiwan, the DPP has played up the 2027 timeline, with none other than President Lai himself saying he believes China is preparing to invade next year. But many Taiwanese dismiss this as an attempt to whip up electoral support. When China is behaving badly and putting pressure on Taiwan, the DPP gets more votes. We saw this in 2020, with the shocking crackdown on Hong Kong in full swing. Taiwanese re-elected President Tsai Ing-wen of the DPP in record numbers, not in spite of, but because of China's very clear dislike of Tsai and her party. There are local elections this year. Lai himself is up for re-election in 2028. The DPP may be hoping that stirring up a sense of urgency on the China threat will shift the polls in their favor. The danger is that setting up expectations for China to take drastic action on Taiwan in 2027 will increase pressure on Xi Jinping to take that step, whether that means an actual invasion or just a larger-than-normal military drill. In other words, the 2027 talk might become a self-fulfilling prophecy.
Lai Ching-te, the president, said that 2027 is the date that it will happen. The Davidson Window, as we talked about in English for so long, has now entered Chinese language discourse. And I think that is actually, in fact, obligated China to do something in 2027. It may not be a full-scale invasion or a blockade, but they have to do something now, some kind of exercise. Lai's comments actually cement that, and that is probably also with the political aim of impacting elections that in a way that works the DPP's favor.
If that does happen, if China marks the 2027 date with major military exercises, but not a blockade or full-on invasion, we can expect that most Taiwanese will react with a shrug. Unless, that is, this time it turns out to be the real deal. Thanks for watching The Diplomat Asia. A Chinese invasion of Taiwan would have major impacts for all the countries in the region. For more, check out our video on how Japan might respond to a war in the Taiwan Strait.